June 10th, 1918. The Adriatic Sea is uncharacteristically calm, a shimmering mirror of glass that belies the brutal reality of the First World War. But on a flickering reel of 35 millimeters celluloid, the world is about to witness an empire die in real time. Most of the great dreadnoughts of this era met their ends in the dark, shrouded by the sulfurous mists of the North Sea or hidden beneath the waves before a camera could ever be positioned. The Queen Mary, the Indefatigable, the Lützow, these leviathans became steel tombs in seconds, witnessed only by the men who were killing them. But the SMS Szent István was different. As the pride of the Austro-Hungarian Navy rolled onto its side, a cameraman on the nearby sister ship, the Tegetthoff, was frantically cranking his handle. He captured something that shouldn't have been possible, a 20,000-ton fortress of steel, designed to withstand the heaviest shells of the era, being brought down by two tiny Italian motorboats. More importantly, he captured the exact moment an engineering philosophy failed, proving that a ship is only as strong as its hidden compromises. This wasn't just a lucky shot by the Italians. It was a structural catastrophe that turned a state-of-the-art battleship into a death trap within minutes. To understand why the Szent István capsized so catastrophically, we have to look at the Tegetthoff-class design, a product of a unique naval arms race. At the start of the 20th century, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was a strange geopolitical beast, a land power with a tiny coastline, yet one gripped by dreadnought fever. The Szent István was the final ship of its class and the only one built in the Hungarian portion of the empire, making it a vital symbol of national prestige. On paper, it was a masterpiece of Mediterranean engineering. It featured 12 massive 30.5-centimeter guns housed in one of the world's first applications of triple-gun turrets. This allowed the designers to pack a massive weight of fire into a shorter, more compact armored citadel. However, for the engineers watching the footage today, those turrets represent the ship's fatal flaw: extreme top heaviness. By stacking 3 massive guns in a single housing, the center of gravity was pushed significantly higher than on contemporary British or American ships. To prevent the ship from becoming unstable in heavy seas, the designers had to make weight-saving compromises elsewhere, specifically in the underwater protection systems that were supposed to keep the ship upright. By June 1918, the strategic situation in the Adriatic had reached a breaking point. The Austro-Hungarian fleet had been bottled up for years by the Otranto barrage, a massive Allied blockade of ships, nets, and mines stretching across the mouth of the Adriatic. The new commander-in-chief, Miklos Horthy, decided on a high-stakes Hail Mary play to smash the blockade with his entire battle fleet. It was meant to be a silent, nighttime sortie, but the Szent István was plagued by bad luck from start. Delayed by engine trouble and forced to steam at high speed to catch up with the rest of the fleet, the battleship began venting thick, black coal smoke into the moonlit sky. This beacon caught the attention of 2 small Italian MAS boats, torpedo motorboats commanded by Luigi Rizzo. These were the Davids to the Austro-Hungarian Goliath. Rizzo slipped past the destroyer screen and fired 2 torpedoes at the massive silhouette. Both struck home on the starboard side, hitting the ship near its most vulnerable point, the partition between the boiler rooms. When the torpedoes struck, the Szent István didn't instantly shatter or explode. In fact, for the first few minutes, the crew believed the ship could be saved. However, the Austro-Hungarian design philosophy was about to collide with reality. In a British dreadnought, the internal longitudinal bulkheads were designed to contain flooding within small, manageable cells. In the Szent István, the internal subdivision was surprisingly poor. The boiler rooms were massive, cavernous spaces. Once the hull was breached, the water didn't just fill one small compartment. It surged into the primary power centers of the ship. Furthermore, the ship's anti-torpedo belt was an engineering myth. The internal armored bulkhead was designed to withstand a specific explosive yield, but by 1918, Italian torpedoes were carrying much larger warheads than the designers had planned for 1910. The bulkhead didn't just bend, it shattered under the pressure, allowing thousands of tons of seawater to bypass the ship's defenses and rush into the heart of the vessel. As the starboard boiler rooms filled, the ship began a slow, inevitable list. This is where the physics of the triple turrets became a death sentence. As the ship tilted just a few degrees, those thousands of tons of steel in the high-mounted turrets began to act as a massive lever, pulling the ship further into the water. On a ship with a greater metacentric height, the measurement of a ship's inherent stability, the hull would have fought to right itself. But the Szent István was already balanced on a razor's edge. Once the list hit 10 degrees, the battle was effectively over. The most damning failure, however, was the loss of power. Because the water had flooded the boiler rooms so rapidly, the ship lost all steam pressure. Without steam, the massive centrifugal pumps designed to clear the water were useless. The crew was left to fight a 20,000-ton flood with hand buckets and desperate, futile counterflooding measures, all while the cameraman on the Tegetthoff watched the horizon tilt. As the list increased to 18 degrees, the scene on the deck of the Szent István turned from organized damage control to a chaotic struggle for survival. The film footage from this moment is hauntingly clinical, showing the massive battleship leaning away from the camera as if tired, its starboard secondary casemates already dipping into the Adriatic. The weight of the water in the boiler rooms, combined with the heavy main turrets, had reached a tipping point where gravity became the ship's primary enemy. Thousands of tons of machinery, coal, and ammunition began to shift toward the low side, creating a feedback loop of instability. The crew tried to traverse the massive 12-inch gun turrets to the port side to act as a counterweight, but with the loss of electrical power and steam, the turrets had to be moved by hand. It was a Herculean task that proved impossible under the steepening angle of the deck. In the footage, you can see men clinging to the railings and the hull, their tiny forms providing a terrifying sense of scale against the mountainous steel hull that was slowly rolling over them. The engineering disaster was compounded by the ship's ventilation system. In a tragic design oversight, the longitudinal bulkheads did not extend all the way to the upper decks, and the ventilation trunks for the massive boiler rooms were not equipped with watertight covers. Once the ship listed far enough for the deck edge to go under, the sea didn't just leak in. It poured down these massive vents directly into the remaining dry compartments. This free surface effect meant that the water inside the ship was moving in sync with the rolling motion, accelerating the capsizing process. On the film, the moment the ship loses its final bit of stability is gut-wrenching. The great hull groans, and the Szent István rolls completely over, her keel exposing the red-painted belly of the beast. For a few moments, she floated upside down, a steel island in the middle of the task force, before the air, trapped inside, escaped in a violent burst of spray and debris. What makes the loss of the Szent István so significant to naval historians and engineers is the sheer speed of the collapse. From the moment the torpedoes struck to the moment the ship disappeared beneath the waves, only 89 minutes had passed. For a modern dreadnought, this was an embarrassingly short lifespan. When compared to British ships at the Battle of Jutland, which often survived dozens of heavy-caliber hits, the Szent István looked like a glass cannon. The post-war analysis revealed that the Austro-Hungarian Tegetthoff class suffered from a fatal combination of high center of gravity and insufficient internal subdivision. The designers had prioritized firepower and speed for the relatively calm waters of the Adriatic, assuming the ship would always be close to a friendly port. They never prepared for a scenario where a breach in the hull would lead to a total loss of power, rendering the ship's active defense systems useless. The footage captured that day was initially suppressed by the Austro-Hungarian High Command, who were horrified by the propaganda blow the film would deal to the empire. However, after the war, the film became one of the most famous pieces of naval history ever recorded. It remains the only time a major battleship's sinking from a torpedo attack was captured from start to finish on professional-grade film. For the veterans and naval enthusiasts watching these frames today, the sinking of the Szent István serves as a grim reminder that in naval architecture, what you can't see, the internal bulkheads, the metacentric height, and the placement of the boilers, is far more important than the size of the guns. The hero of the Adriatic didn't die because of a massive explosion or a grand fleet engagement. It died because of a few inches of shattered steel and the relentless laws of physics that punish a top-heavy design. Even today, the wreck of the Szent István lies upside down on the seafloor off the island of Bermuda, a massive tomb at a depth of 66 meters. Divers who visit the site report that the ship is remarkably intact, sitting on its turrets which were crushed into the seabed by the immense weight of the hull. The hole from Luigi Rizzo's torpedoes is still visible, a jagged gateway into the boiler rooms that doomed the ship. It stands as a submerged monument to the end of an era, the moment when the undisputed kings of the ocean, the dreadnoughts, were proven vulnerable to the smallest of predators. The film of its death remains a haunting technical manual on how not to build a battleship, ensuring that while the Szent István failed in its mission to break the blockade, its final moments would be studied by engineers for over a century. The immediate aftermath of the sinking was a paralysis that effectively ended the Austro-Hungarian Empire as a naval power. When the Szent István slipped beneath the waves, taking 89 men with her, Admiral Horthy faced a devastating choice. The element of surprise was gone. The unsinkable pride of the fleet was at the bottom of the sea, and the Italian mass boats were still prowling the area. Fearing that the remaining three sister ships, the Viribus Unitas, Tegetthoff, and Prinz Eugen, suffered from the same fatal stability flaws, Horthy aborted the mission. The great sortie to break the Otranto barrage was over before it had truly begun. The fleet turned back to the safety of Pola, where the massive dreadnoughts would spend the rest of the war as fleet in being trophies, too precious and too fragile to ever risk in open water again. The engineering post-mortem conducted by naval historians in the decades following the war highlights a specific phenomenon known as the free surface effect, which was the final nail in the ship's coffin. As the Szent István listed, the water inside the massive, undivided boiler rooms didn't just sit still, it shifted toward the low side of the ship. This shifted the center of gravity even further away from the center line. In naval architecture, this creates a virtual rise in the center of gravity, effectively making the ship even more top-heavy than its blueprint suggested. Because the Tegetthoff class had such a narrow beam relative to its height, it had no reserve buoyancy to counteract this shift. Once the water reached the level of the main deck, the ship's righting arm, the physical force that tries to push a tilting ship back to an upright position, actually became negative. At that point, physics dictated that the ship wanted to be upside down. Beyond the technical failure, the sinking of the Szent István marked a psychological shift in the history of naval warfare. For centuries, the line of battle ship was the ultimate arbiter of global power. The dreadnought was the most complex and expensive machine a 20th century nation could produce. Yet, the footage proved that a $20 million floating fortress could be annihilated by two wooden motorboats costing a few $1,000s. This was the birth of asymmetrical naval warfare. The Italian MAS boats represented a new era where speed, stealth, and the torpedo could negate the massive steel plates and 12-inch guns of the old guard. The film didn't just show a ship sinking. It showed the obsolescence of a philosophy. It was a visual data point that every major navy in the world, including the U.S. Navy, would study when designing the next generation of battleships, leading to wider beams and much more robust internal honeycombing of watertight compartments. The survival of the film itself is a story of historical luck. Had the Austro-Hungarians won the war, the footage likely would have stayed locked in a vault, hidden to protect the reputation of the Naval Academy at Fiume and the Ganzanubia shipyard. Instead, as the empire collapsed in late 1918, the footage was released, providing a visceral, haunting look at the final moments of a superpower. For the older demographic of naval enthusiasts today, the footage resonates because it lacks the CGI polish of modern war movies. There is a terrifying weight to the way the Szent István rolls, the slow, rhythmic struggle of a 20,000-ton object fighting an invisible force. You can see the steam and smoke mixing with the spray, and you can almost hear the screeching of the internal rivets as they sheared under the weight of the tilting turrets. Ultimately, the Szent István remains the only battleship whose death was documented with such clinical precision during the Great War. It serves as a permanent warning to engineers about the dangers of prestige design. When you prioritize the number of guns and the speed of the vessel over the boring, invisible necessities of internal subdivision and stability, you aren't building a weapon, you're building a tomb. The footage is a 35mm testament to the fact that in the unforgiving environment of the open sea, the laws of buoyancy are the only laws that truly matter. The ship that was built to project the power of the Habsburg for decades instead became a 60-minute countdown to a watery grave, leaving behind only a few minutes of grainy film and a legacy of engineering failure that is still taught in naval architecture classrooms today. The legacy of the Szent István extends far beyond the moment it vanished from the surface of the Adriatic. To truly understand why this sinking remains the gold standard for naval failure analysis, we have to look at the ship as it exists today, a colossal, inverted wreck resting 66 meters below the surface. Modern deep-sea expeditions have provided the missing data that the 1918 film couldn't capture. When divers first reached the hull, they expected to find a ship shattered by explosions. Instead, they found a hull that was eerily intact, save for the specific areas where the engineering had buckled. The wreck lies upside down because the heavy triple turrets, those 12-inch monsters that were the ship's pride, acted as a lead weight that pulled the vessel over as soon as it lost its stability. The turrets are now buried deep in the seafloor mud, crushed under the 20,000-ton weight of the ship above them. This physical orientation is the ultimate proof of the top-heavy theory. In naval architecture, if a ship sinks upright, it usually means it lost its buoyancy. It simply became too heavy for the water it displaced. But when a ship sinks upside down, it means it lost its stability. Its center of gravity moved outside, its metacentric comfort zone. The Szent István didn't just fill with water, it tripped over itself. The engineering post-mortem reveals a catastrophic oversight in the hull's riveting process. Because the ship was built in the Gandinubia shipyards in Fiume, a facility that had never built a ship of this scale before, the quality of the steel plates and the rivets was notably inferior to those produced in the Austrian shipyards in Trieste. Metallurgical analysis of recovered rivets suggests they were brittle. When the Italian torpedoes struck, the shockwave didn't just punch a hole. It caused a zipper effect, where the vibration caused the heads of the rivets to pop off for dozens of feet along the hull. This turned a localized hit into a massive, uncontrollable breach. This is a critical lesson for any military-industrial complex. The prestige of building a national ship in a domestic yard is worthless if that yard lacks the technical maturity to handle the tolerances required for a dreadnought. The Szent István was a victim of political geography as much as it was a victim of Italian torpedoes. If we look at the broader context of 1918, the sinking was a harbinger of the end of the dreadnought era. For nearly a decade, the world superpowers had engaged in a ruinous spending spree, believing that the nation with the biggest ships would dictate the terms of the century. The British, Germans, Americans, and Japanese were all building ships that followed the same basic logic as the Szent István: bigger guns, more armor, and higher speeds. But the footage of the Szent István rolling over like a wounded whale provided a sobering reality check. It proved that the battleship was a glass giant. It showed that the most expensive weapon in human history could be neutralized by a few men in a motorboat powered by an isotofrescini engine. This realization fundamentally changed how the U.S. Navy and the Royal Navy approached the interwar period. After 1918, designers began to obsess over underwater protection schemes and torpedo blisters, external structures added to the hull to move the point of impact further away from the ship's vitals. The human element of the sinking, captured in those grainy frames, is perhaps the most haunting aspect for the modern viewer. As the ship reaches its point of no return, you can see the crew attempting to abandon ship. Unlike many other maritime disasters where panic takes over, the footage shows a chillingly disciplined crew. Because the list happened over the course of nearly 90 minutes, there was time for the men to line up on the high side of the hull. But here, the engineering failure created a new horror. As the ship rolled, the massive, barnacle-encrusted hull became a steep, slippery cliff. Men who tried to slide down the side were often caught by the bilge keels, long steel fins designed to reduce rolling, which acted like giant blades as the ship rotated. Many of the 89 men who died weren't killed by the explosion or by drowning. They were killed by the ship itself as it performed its final, agonizing somersault. The footage also highlights the secondary battery problem. As the ship tilts, the secondary 15-centimeter guns, located in casemates along the side of the hull, become the primary entry points for water. On the Szent István, these casemates were located too low to the waterline. In the film, you can see the moment the starboard casemates are submerged. This wasn't just a leak. It was like opening a series of massive floodgates. Once the water entered the secondary battery deck, it had a straight path to the internal heart of the ship because the watertight doors between the battery and the rest of the ship were often left open to allow for ammunition transport. This is a classic example of operational failure magnifying design failure. The crew was trained to fight a surface battle, not to survive a capsize, and their standard operating procedures actually accelerated the sinking. For the audience of naval history buffs, particularly the old guard of veterans and engineers, the Szent István represents a what-if moment. What if the Austro-Hungarians had invested in better internal subdivision? What if they had opted for twin turrets instead of triples to keep the center of gravity lower? If the Szent István had survived that morning off Bermuda, the Otranto barrage might have been broken, and the entire naval balance of the Mediterranean could have shifted. But the laws of physics are not interested in what-ifs. The ship was a mathematical certainty of failure the moment the first rivet was driven in fume. It was a vessel designed for the parade ground, not for the messy, violent reality of modern torpedo warfare. As we conclude this deep dive into the SMS Szent István, we have to acknowledge the strange immortality the film has granted the ship. Most of its contemporaries are forgotten names in a dusty ledger, their final moments unrecorded and unremembered. But the Szent István lives on in a loop of flickering silver nitrate. We see the smoke, we see the list, we see the men, and we see the final plunge. It remains a stark reminder that in the world of high-stakes engineering, there is no such thing as a small compromise. A single calculation of metacentric height, a slightly lower quality batch of rivets, or a ventilation duct left uncovered can bring down the greatest pride of an empire. The Szent István didn't just sink. It taught the world how a battleship dies. It showed us that the invincible armor of a dreadnought is only a shell, and that the true life of a ship is found in the hidden, unglamorous bulkheads that hold back the sea. It is a story of how the smallest predator can kill the largest prey, and how the most advanced technology of an era can be undone by a failure to respect the most basic principles of the ocean. When we watch that footage today, we aren't just looking at a historical event. We are looking at a masterclass in why every detail matters. The ghost of the Szent István still haunts every naval shipyard in the world, a silent warning that the sea always finds the flaw.